All right, welcome back to Questions of the Day. Now, you may recall that we have a special series going on where we talk with stakeholders involved in public engagement training initiatives. These can be those who are partaking in the training, those who are delivering the training, those who are designing the trainings, and everything in between. And so we've had a wonderful set of conversations and we will continue to do so. And so today I'm very excited to be joined by Kristel Tjandra. And she has a fantastic journey that I'm hoping that we can decode during our conversation. So
Yeah, thanks for having me, Fanuel.
wonderful. Now, Kristel, you are, I was thinking about this, like best to describe you're a scientist turned journalist. Okay. I was wondering if you can tell us, take us back on your journey through the lens of your experiences in science communication and science journalism. Tell us like what was happening as you went through undergrad to grad to your postdoc, and also you were a
Mhm.
faculty member in there as well, and then back to graduate school through the lens of science communication.
Yeah, actually, I was introduced to science communication, I think, pretty late. I got into science communication when I was a postdoc. So throughout undergrad, my PhD, and then my first postdoc, I didn't really think much about science communication. And then it was during my postdoc at Stanford, which I started in 2020, that I first got introduced to people who do science communication full time. And it was through interactions with them, communicating with them about, oh, what the job really looks like, that I started to get really interested in it. Especially as you know, 2020 during the pandemic, there were just so many. There's an intense coverage on health issues and viruses, and a lot of confusions around science reporting, that I started to realize that, hey, this is really important. And as a scientist, that's really where you can make impact, to be able to inform the public about what is true about science, and really communicating ideas that can change people's actions. So that's kind of a brief overview of how I got introduced to science communication.
Because if anybody was to look at your profile, they would say, wow, you probably got into this way earlier. So you're actually saying you got into this much later. So what was
Mhm.
happening during undergrad and grad school? Were you just not exposed to it, never heard of it? Take us back a little bit there.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad and my PhD in Australia.
Mm.
And back then, the media landscape was very different there and here in the US. I think science journalism is, you have a lot of different types of journalism in America that I think you don't really see as much in Australia. There are science coverage in Australia, but I was just like not so exposed to that. I guess throughout my undergrad and my grad, I was very much exposed to science communication in terms of communicating my own science. So I wasn't reading so much about journalistic pieces, but I was trained to communicate my own research in platforms where I'm communicating to other scientists instead of the public. So I had that, but when I think it was really when I moved to the US. So I moved to the US in 2020, that I was first introduced to the media landscape in the US. That's very different. That's very diverse. Um, so yeah, I guess that's why I wasn't really thinking about it as much, and the people around me weren't thinking about it as much either. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so clearly a light bulb went off, right? When you started getting
Mhm.
exposed. Tell us about that. The light bulbs, what was actually turned on in your mind as you start seeing science journalism, science communication, and there are differences, of course, but tell us what was going on through your mind.
I think one is recognizing how important it is, that people are curious. People do want to hear from scientists about what they're doing. People do want to seek answers to things that are relevant in their environment, in their lives. And I just see a lot of examples where you can really create powerful pieces, journalistic pieces that will inform policies, inform people's actions, inform people decisions. And I really think that when I got first introduced to it, which is during the pandemic, that's very obvious that it is making an impact. So I think when I thought about it and really carefully, I was like, wow, if I can contribute to it, this will be really great. And that was when I first think, this is probably something that I need to think about more seriously, and potentially make it my career.
Yeah. And that's when you started seeking out training,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I mean,
That's right.
tell us about that. Yeah. So what specific skill sets were you after, and how were you approaching that search?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I look up opportunities to do internships with different magazines. And also college publications, a great place to start. So I was at Stanford when I looked into this, and I contacted the student-run newspaper called the Stanford Daily, and I asked them, can I try this out? Can I try to pitch you some stories and write you a few clips on science or research that's coming out of Stanford? And they were very gracious, even though I don't have any experience. They were like, yeah, sure. And so that was like kind of one of the first few clips that I had. I also had an internship with a small magazine that kind of looked into the intersection between science and humanities, and I was always been fascinated with how science affect people of different background or from different angles. So I was writing about the intersection between science and religion, science and race, science and gender, and really just think about the societal issues surrounding science that I don't really look into much in my own research. So that's quite refreshing. Yeah, so I think throughout those few experiences, I started to think about it more professionally. I think those two instances in the beginning, it was kind of like a side gig. I would do that, after hours or in the weekends. And then I started talking to people who have made that transition from being a scientist to a science journalist or a science communicator. And they started to think, to tell me about how they shifted from being a scientist to a writer. And that involved, trying to write for a bigger platform, find an internship that's, kind of like national internships. And so I was so lucky that I applied to the Drug Discovery News internship. It was still during my postdoc, and they let me write a few stories about drug development and drug discovery, which were actually topics that are relevant to my own training as a chemist. So that was a kind of a smooth transition, I would say, because I was thinking about chemistry questions, I was doing research in chemistry, and then I was writing all these stories about drug development as well. That's kind of adjacent to my research. Yeah.
So you actually took advantage of this during your postdoc, right? We tend
Mm-hmm.
to think of training a lot at the graduate level, right? I think the postdoc tend to be forgotten somehow, and that's changing. But still, when you think about public engagement, especially the postdoctoral stage and science communication, really it's kind of free for all, right? You have to be resourceful, right? You have to take the initiative. Was the environment supportive of that where you were at?
Yeah. I mean, for the first few opportunities that I have, obviously I always communicate with my PI that, hey, this is what I'm considering and I really like this. Also, like the way I phrase it, and it's not like covering it up or anything, but like I want to be good at grant writing, like as a postdoc, because that's like one of the things that you need to be able to do, right? You need to be able to communicate your science. And sometimes when you're writing or communicating your science, you're not communicating to people who are experts in your field, right? So you might have to apply for grants that are more broad in terms of like the scientific coverage is more broad, or to agencies that are doing kind of not just science research. So you need to be able to communicate to different stakeholders, right? So I think, yeah, the way I communicated with my PI was that, hey, this is something that I'm interested in. I want to get better at my writing. And I think this will really help in terms of me writing future grants, writing future papers, so that I can be a clearer communicator. And he was very supportive of that. And he was like, yeah, as long as, you complete your research tasks and you feel like this is not going to interfere with your work, then go ahead. And so I think, obviously, there are sacrifices. I mean, I have to work more, and it's on top of my full-time job. But I think it's worth it because it is beneficial for my professional development as well as a scientist.
Yeah. So you double down on the writing piece, right? Because you clearly saw this power, right? That writing. And tell me if I'm wrong, right? That writing, because there are other skill sets involved in this, right? Whether you're be in front of the camera, for example, or the oral side of the equation as well, right? Or if you want to be on the community engagement, direct engagement with the communities as well, that involves a different set of skill sets. Now, along the way, Kristel, you won a small award. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So after having a few clips, that's, I guess, I wrote over the course of maybe 1 or 2 years. I applied for this award in 2022, and it was the inaugural Eric and Wendy Schmidt Awards in science communication. And I won the award as a scientist. So there are a few categories in the awards. So one of them was for scientists, early career scientists who are doing science communication. And that was for a few pieces that I wrote that was in the intersection between science and humanities. So how is science affecting people of different backgrounds, and what are people's experience of science in the day-to-day? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the. I think for those who are curious, do check out the awards. I believe they're annual every year, and Kristel was one of the awardees. And you're right, there's several categories involved. And so you then made a decision along the way to go back to graduate school, right?
Yeah.
So right now you're a graduate student at University of California, Santa Cruz. And it's in fact, sidebar, this is one of the schools that is on our dashboard, the public engagement, listing all these training initiatives, bachelor's programs, master's programs, internships, undergraduate level, and one can navigate and find all these initiatives. But Kristel, take us there. Like, what was that decision making about, to being a graduate student again?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I can backtrack a little bit at the end of my postdoc. So my contract was coming to an end, and I was like, okay, I really need to think about what's the next step. And I feel like throughout my academic career, I've been thinking about, building my portfolio to be a professor. But towards the end of my postdoc, I really had this realization that actually that's not really what I wanted. I have really enjoyed being in the lab and doing hands-on research and everything, but I couldn't really see myself building a lab myself and being a PI. So I spent a few months before my research ended to explore different types of careers. And obviously at that time, I was already writing for different outlets, just kind of freelancing. And I started to think about, hey, what about science communication full time? And so I spoke with a lot of different people, and also my connection with the people who won the award that I was part of. And people keep on, I keep on bumping into people who have done the UCSC program, and they all gave a very positive feedback about their time at UC Santa Cruz. And so I contacted someone who's in the program and said, can we just have a chat and help me think through, my career decisions. And so I did. And the more I think about it, I thought, yeah, some people can go from being a scientist to science communicator without having a formal degree. And that is a pathway that some people have chosen. But for me at the time, it was, I think, the connection and the mentorship that I was really looking for, and being in a program where you're being trained, in an intensive program where you're being trained by people who are in the field, active journalists. I think that's really valuable. And that kind of like helped me speed up the transition, really. So far, I think I've been learning a lot, just different formats of writing. I am now kind of exposed to also radio. So every quarter we have to do an internship, and I'm doing an internship in a radio station right now. So yeah, opportunities that I think I wouldn't be able to tap into if I wasn't in the program, and just being able to meet editors from different types of magazines, people who have gone through the program or come into the program through different pathways as well, and just listening to their stories and their passion has been really valuable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you pick this program for that mentorship, as you mentioned, right? And that hands-on, right? These professors that are training you are on the field, right, learning themselves. And you continued on the writing side, right? Writing is it continues to be a focus. And so at KQED, I believe that's where your internship is. Are you a writer there, or are you sort of doing more the podcasting side, radio? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny because like I've never done radio before KQED, and so when I got the internship and when I applied, actually, I thought, okay, maybe I'll do less writing. But actually, a lot of, if you're familiar with radio, a lot of radio reporting starts with writing, and actually learning how to distill information. And what is very unique about radio is that a lot of the news pieces are like, you have very limited space, right? So we're talking about distilling information in 30 seconds and being able to say it in a way that your listeners, maybe they're on their way home from work or they're on the way to the grocery store, being able to speak succinctly or write succinctly that people will get the point immediately is hard. And I'm currently in the science desk as well. And as you know, sometimes new studies that are being released can be very complicated. Scientific concepts can be very complicated, but how do you communicate that in a way that people will understand? Even people who have no science background at all will be able to appreciate. That's a challenge that, I find myself lucky to be able to learn. Yeah.
And so at US at the University of California, Santa Cruz, I did take a look at some of your cohorts. I mean, there are some other scientists, right, who have made that transition over. What is it like being among others, right, who are on this vessel with you on this journey?
Yeah, we consider ourselves nerds. Definitely. Everyone's very curious, very excited about science. And obviously some people have, different affinities to different topics. But it's been really great sharing this experience with other people who have been in the scientific field and who knows, what a science lab is like. What does it look like to work in a lab or doing research? And so, yeah, I think being able to share that experience and being able to see where people really get excited is really fun. Yeah.
So I wish we can just keep talking, because there's so many things that you've said that we can just digest further, right? I want to zoom out a little bit and give us your take on the landscape of training. here in the US, and especially for graduate students who are now going through, right? They're looking for these opportunities because a lot of them are not part of the formal training, right? It's something that you have to go out, like what you did in your postdoc, go out and find the opportunities yourself. What are you seeing now? There are now more opportunities. They're slowly growing and expanding. There's still a lot to be done, but what is your take on the landscape as it's growing?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there are many opportunities in the US. I mean, I've been in 3 different countries, I guess. And if I compare, between US and Australia and Indonesia, I think the US by far, at least from my experience, has the most diverse training landscape in terms of science communication. For people who are still at the university, I think really tap into your university science communication outlets, such as student-run newspaper or like the press office, and just reach out and just be like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Is it okay if I write 1 or 2 clips? And really this occupation is all about doing it yourself, being hands-on. And it's, there's a lot of maybe textbooks that you can read about writing and how to write science for the general public. But until you do it yourself, I think that's just, at least for me, it's the best way to learn, to try it out and seek feedback. Maybe you can write something and then ask your colleague or someone who's doing this professionally to give you feedback on, hey, what do you think about this? And yeah, I think there are just so many ways to get training, whether it's formally or informally.
Yeah. And so you're graduating, right, soon, I believe. What's next for you?
That's a good question. So I am looking for more opportunities to write science. I think I'm still in the phase where I don't want to limit myself to a certain type of scientific writing. So I'm open to, writing for newspapers or magazines or institutions. Yeah, that would be my next, I guess. Yeah, being a staff position somewhere.
Yeah, scientist to journalist. Is there any chance you could go back to science as well?
Yeah, I think so. I always feel like, life changes and what opportunities kind of change as well. I think, the sad thing is there's now a lot of, I guess, news about journalistic outlets laying off their workers. And I think at some point you just need to be realistic about what's out there. And I feel like that's the way I approach things as well. And I think once you are trained in something, you never lose those skills. And I'm open. If one day I will go back to being a scientist and do science journalism on the side, or maybe I just do journalism full time. That's all possibilities. Yeah.
Okay, so we are at time. Soon enough, Kristel, we need to have you back. Maybe we can decode one of these pieces that you've written.
Thanks again, Fanuel.